Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka I've got an incredible breakdown for you from this past weekend's tournaments, along with that's right, two first place interviews. So get ready for their perspective, as well as a lot of data, analyzing some card choices, and just taking a look at what decks are consistently topping. Let's get to it. I'm going to give you a quick overview on each of these tournaments and kind of cross compare. Then we're going to take a look at the first place deck list as well as the first place interviews. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. I'm trying not to keep you here too long because I know that you're probably on a tight schedule and I want to respect your time. Looking at the top cut, we'll start with the first tournament that started this weekend, the Pocket Legends League. And you'll notice that there was a lot of Arceus and Dialga, and then there was a lot of Rampardos mixed with some Palkia and Articuno 18 trainers. And then, two Palkia Origin, two Arceus Greninja, and then a lot of one-ofs. So when I take a look at this, the first things that stand out to me are that the two most popular decks did take up a large portion of the top cut. Like in terms of the meta share, Arceus Dialga had 25% of the meta and took up 30% of the top cut. It's a little bit of a drop-off with Rampardos. Rampardos was 12% of the meta, but it only took up 11% of the top cut, which is still a lot. But when you compare it to the fact that the 18 trainer decks were brought a lot less and had just as high as a conversion rate to top cut, that kind of lets you know, 18 trainer decks are definitely a thing that you should be aware of, and that's probably a good threshold for testing new decks. And then also it lets you know that maybe Rampardos didn't perform as well in this tournament compared to maybe some of the other tournaments that we're going to talk about. The overall winner was actually, ironically, a Rampardos deck. So we'll take a look at that deck list and we'll move on to the Spragels and Hoogland tournament. So this tournament had a large chunk of Arceus Dialga as well as Rampardos in the top cut. You'll notice that they took up 34 spots of the 52 places for top cut, which is insane. I mean, we're talking about 65-ish% of the top cut was two decks. Even if you compare that to the Pocket Legends League, it was about 41% of the top cut with those two decks, right? So again, you're starting to see in these giant tournaments, with 1,000 people or so, that Dialga and Arceus are definitely top of the line, as well as Rampardos, and then everything else is just kind of finding its own little place, finding its own little groove. The interesting part about this tournament as well was that Palkia Origin form was the winning deck, and there was only one of them that made it into the top cut. So you are seeing, decks that are necessarily, I wouldn't call them underdogs. I guess they kind of are, but they're definitely underrepresented and still finding ways to win in some of these top cuts. But the other thing that kind of stands out is that the Rampardos and Dialga Arceus deck, they both had great conversion rates. We're talking about 13% of the meta converted to almost 27% of the top cut. 22%, almost 23% of the meta converted almost 39% of the top cut. That's excellent conversion rate. I can't stress that enough. That's very good. And when you start talking about the best decks that we've seen in other formats, if you've seen some of my other breakdown videos like this, you'll notice that is definitely on the higher end of the spectrum for conversion rates. The Ursiiday tournament, which I actually got a chance to co-host and co-cast with Ursi, that was fantastic. I hope you tuned in. It was an incredible top four. But anyway, so looking at these numbers, again, 23% of the meta, roughly 24% for Dialga Arceus, and it took up 40% of the top cut. And then Rampardos took up 12% of the meta, almost 13% of the meta, and then 23% of the top cut. So again, there's definitely an outlier when you take a look at the Pocket Legends League tournament, and when you compare it to how Rampardos did in the other tournament. So it's a little bit of an outlier, but for the most part, Dialga Arceus performed about as well, throughout all three of these tournaments in terms of conversion rate as well. When you take a look at the Rampardos deck for the Ursiiday tournament, and again, I tried to section them 1-1-1, and I went through them one by one, so that way you can hopefully, take a look at the data yourself. If you want to screenshot this, you're more than welcome to, obviously, as well. The Rampardos deck, 12, again, almost 13% of the meta, getting 23% of the top cut, and then from there you see the 18 trainer decks, and then some Palkia Origin, some Dark Zone, some Gallade Sudowoodo, and then some other rogue decks. And the thing that I look at when I see the overall numbers is there are no electric decks, there are no psychic decks. And also, when I take a look at some of this, there's only, I think, maybe 3 or so grass decks, if you want to technically call Arceus and Carnivine a grass deck. Maybe about 4. But again, like if you look at strictly like grass Pokemon decks, like Egg Celebi took up 1 spot in the Ursiiday tournament, and then I believe in the Pocket League Legends tournament, we saw 1 Leafeon Celebi. Outside of that, like, you're seeing basically grass got pretty much phased out of the game for the most part right now. Dark is still around a little bit, but obviously metal types, steel types, right, and fighting types seem to take up a lot of these top cut spots. And then water has a lot of different variants. Like, that's one thing that I noticed. There's a bunch. There's multiple Gyarados variants. There's Glaceon decks. There's Palkia Origin decks. There's just Palkia and Vaporeon decks, and then you've got the 18 trainer decks. You've got a lot of variety when it comes to water, and I think a lot of that kind of like stems from the fact that Misty finally has a lot of good decks that it can go into, and it's not the sole win condition, right? But it's like an added win condition, right? It creates these blowout situations. Not only does it have Misty, it has Manaphy. And Manaphy is, again, you've probably heard me say it a million times, it's a snowball card. It snowballs out of control if your opponent cannot answer it, right? If your opponent has a hard time knocking out Manaphy, it gets to a point where sometimes your Palkias will be loaded up with 4 to 6 energies. I mean, it really spirals out of control. And on a similar point of view, you can also see that same trend in some Dialga decks, right? Like, you're not able to get rid of the Dialga fast enough, and they win second, and now they've ramped everything, and they're just going to go ahead and sweep you, right? You may be able to get a knockout on that Dialga, but the rest of their Pokemon are going to be, almost close to full health, and you're going to need to be able to one-shot them if you can. So, looking at the meta, this is where we're at right now. I would say Dialga Arceus might be the best deck we've ever seen in the game. And I know I said that about Dark Zone before. And honestly, the way the game looks right now, again, I would say that as of right now, like if you had a tournament of like different eras, like for Mythical Island era, if you had the Pikachu deck, the Mewtwo deck, the Gyarados deck, and the Charizard deck, and any variant, right, Arcazard or Charizard, whatever you want to play, then, you took Dark Zone and Raid Boss Executor, and then you took from this era Rampardos and Arceus Dialga. I would probably lean towards the Arceus Dialga deck winning that tournament. And I would love to see that, by the way. That would be an incredible, like, you have to choose one of those eras, and you can only play cards from, like, that deck list. That would be really fascinating to me. But anyways, there's the breakdown on the top cuts. Let's take a look at these deck lists and some of these player interviews. Starting with the first place finisher from the Pocket Legend League. This is DAIDR. You could say you could pronounce it Diter or Dater, however you want to pronounce it. But this was the winning Rampardos list from the Pocket Legends League tournament. The things that stand out to me are the 1-1 split, 1 Sudowoodo, 1 Marshadow. Then I look at the other cards in the deck. There's 1 Pokemon Communication, 1 Giant Cape, 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus, and everything else is pretty standard. I think it's a pretty solid deck, right? Like, I mean, you're not going to find many people that are going to complain about this deck. The Giant Cape could definitely be a Pokemon Communication, but there will be scenarios where that Giant Cape will come in handy and make you survive an extra turn. And because of that, you're able to maybe get one more attack in that, hopefully gets you closer to victory. Slashu is the first place finisher from the Spragels and Hoogland tournament. This is the Palkia Origin form deck, and interestingly enough, somebody pointed out in the comments that this is actually the exact deck that I went ahead and made adjustments to in my weekend preview video from Friday. So again, I actually played this deck card for card. I ended up getting 5 wins on one of my free-to-play accounts with this exact deck. Very good. I did it in like 25 minutes. It was really quick. So I was pretty familiar with this deck, and I thought that it had, pretty good potential because it can, put you in situations where now your opponent has to knock out a 1-prizer, and then a Palkia. And then if they don't answer the mana fee, that Palkia EX can just completely sweep. So there's a lot of things that can go on with this deck. I love the double leaf, love the giant cape. The Aritas are great. Like, this is a very good deck list, and we actually saw this exact deck list in the Ursiiday tournament as well. And that deck got to, I want to say, top 16, and ended up losing in top 16. But again, very good deck. It's a very fun deck as well if you're into playing water type Pokemon. The fact that it doesn't play any evolutions gives you a little bit more of a feeling that you're not going to brick like as often. Now, you're still going to brick. That's just the nature of the game every now and then. But I think one of the strengths of this deck is that you're not playing an evolution line, so you have more room for those extra supporters and item cards and Pokemon tools, as opposed to playing some of these other water decks that are playing a stage 1. So you have to fill up, you're playing more Pokemon, then you're like, I have to play communication, and then you lose out on some of these tools or these other supporters. So that's kind of my viewpoint on this deck. But again, very good deck. Shout out to Slashu, and let's take a look at the first player interview from the first place finisher, Slashu. This was the interview. I decided to put this up on the screen so you could maybe pause and read yourself. I'll try to go over this as well. But again, like I started to look at some of the suggestions you guys made for the questions, and I tried to kind of take some of your feedback and kind of change up the questions. But this was the conversation that I got to have with Slashu. So big shout out to Slashu. And some of these interviews, they do have a language barrier, which is it's really cool that this game is connecting people internationally. So I'll try to go ahead and fill in some of those language barriers if it pops up. But for the most part, all of these interviews, pretty easy to understand. So I asked, again, what deck did you use and what playtesting led you to bring it? Because I know some people wanted to know about the playtesting process. They said Palkia deck with Manaphy and Origin form Palkia. It's actually their first time running this deck. They had no playtesting prior to the tournament. Their clanmate showed the deck to them one day and its win rates against different matchups on Limitless. We saw us doing well against the popular decks, so we decided, hey, we weren't sure how good it was because of the small sample size, but they said, hey, I'll run this deck and just see how it does, and they ended up winning the whole thing. So shout out to them and their clanmates, right? Looking at the top cut, what stood out to you? They said there was a lot of Dialga Arceus and Rampardos decks, which was not surprising as these are the popular meta decks. I was happy to see other Arceus variants and some off-meta decks made it to top cut, such as Arceus Carnivine, Arceus Greninja, and Glaceon Palkia. If you could change any cards in your deck, what would they be? They said, I would say the deck is good as is, because it felt cohesive overall. There are some deck lists that add helmets instead of capes, but having tested the deck throughout the tournament, the capes matter a lot in different various matchups. So that's just reiterating what I said the Friday before these tournaments and what I just repeated earlier in this video. So there you go, straight from the horse's mouth from the first place finisher. It's cool to see that. And the last question I asked is, do you think this deck can repeat this same success? Definitely. In its core, it's a strong contender for being a top deck given the meta, and based on recent tournaments, it's already been gaining traction. So again, big shout out to Slashu. Thank you so much. And again, this is just an open invitation. If you get top cut in one of these big tournaments, reach out to me. I would love to talk to you, and hopefully I can get people every week and feature them in these deck profile interviews. And again, big shout out to Slashu. This is one of the coolest things about the community is we don't all speak the same language. We're not all from the same place, but a lot of people are willing to at least share their experiences, and maybe it helps some people become better players and understand the process that some of these people take in route to winning a tournament. Renta was the winner of the Ursiiday Pocket Tournament from this past weekend. They played Arceus Dialga. This deck was really fascinating because this deck felt like it was 100% engineered to beat the mirror match. There are no Mars cards in this deck list, and typically what we saw with a lot of these Arceus Dialga decks is they were playing at least one Mars, anticipating you to knock out their Dialga, and then using Mars in kind of like a swing turn to go ahead and try to reverse sweep you. This deck has the Healing Shaman, 2 Leafs, 2 Giovanni, 2 Potions, 2 Rocky Helmet, and 1 Giant Cape. You'll notice there's no Sabrina as well, and the addition of Rocky Helmet to this deck allows it to feel a lot better even when it goes first in the mirror match. And there also are some arguments that Rocky Helmet can help in the fighting matchup against Rampardos as well. So very cool deck. And let's get to the second and the final first place interview that I got to have with Renta. So I sent them the questions, and let's just dive right in. They said that this deck is a slightly modified version that was used by Saitama, who had won this tournament. This was the first time for me to use this deck. The card that played well in the top cut was Rocky Helmet. If I had to change it, I would change it to Giovanni. So I'm not sure what they mean right there, because they play 2 Rocky Helmet and 2 Giovanni. So again, a little bit of a language barrier there. I want to say that this person, they do have a Japanese flag, if I remember correctly, on Limitless. So I would imagine that there might be a little bit of a language barrier there. But again, if I had to change, I just read that. So if this deck becomes popular, it will be difficult, but if the environment doesn't change, I can win again. So they're pretty confident in this deck. And when I asked the question, do you think this deck can repeat this same success? And one thing that stand out to me is the fact that they use the word if the environment, right? The word environment, like that lets me know like they definitely had to be using some sort of translator, right? Because in English, we would say the word meta, right? We would say, but if the meta doesn't change in that little example. So again, like I love this. It's so cool. And I'm happy that I can, get a little bit of insight into different communities from around the world. So again, big shout out to the first place finishers in these tournaments, giving me the time of day to go ahead and ask them these questions. So I wanted to follow up because there was one question that I had in the back of my mind. You can probably point it out at the bottom of this interaction, but I said, hey, it seems like your deck was built to beat other Dialga decks. Was that your goal? That is exactly right. I brought it to beat Dialga and fighting types. So that was really interesting to me, because previously, like in the Ursiiday tournament, when we were co-casting together, Ursi asked me a really good question on the spot, and I was like, dang, I don't know. But she asked me, do you think, like, what deck would you rather have? This deck that Renta played, or the other like standard Dialga Arceus deck that we've been seeing if you're playing against Rampardos? And initially I said I would rather just have the regular like deck list, because it has Giant Capes and like it has the Sabrina that could come in handy as well. But after like reading Renta's response to this and then kind of looking at it a little bit closer, I could see the argument for cards like Rocky Helmet making the fighting Pokemon worse, because they're already pretty low HP. And if you're able to heal with cards like Shaman, cards like Potion, you can extend the life of your EX Pokemon, preventing them from getting a knockout. And then it could turn into a situation where if they swing, Rocky Helmet is knocking out their Pokemon, and then you're putting in another EX to immediately KO that second Pokemon. So like I could definitely see it, and whenever they said that, like the light bulb and the wheels in my mind really started turning. So again, really cool perspective, and I'm just so happy that they shared it with not only me, but now all of you guys that watch the videos as well. So in conclusion, what a weekend of tournaments, and there were plenty of other tournaments, and the tournaments are continuously just getting bigger and bigger in terms of prize support. So like this game is in a awesome spot right now, in my opinion. Plus we've got that ranked coming in at the end of the month. And again, like my whole thought process with ranked is you're probably going to see a lot of the same decks that you're seeing like at the top at the top level tournaments, you're probably going to see those top decks in ranked as well. So, depending on like how high you climb. So again, I think that there's a lot of good takeaways. It's very good to be in tune with like how the tournament meta is, even if you don't play, because that might be something that you encounter in the ranked ladder eventually. So a lot of stuff to take away. And again, I can't thank you all enough for taking time out of your day for me to be background noise. Maybe it was entertainment, or hey, maybe you learned something from one of those incredible first place finishers. And again, I hope to see you around for more. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button at the bottom right of my video. It's my logo, and that'll help you stay in tuned and get alerts for when new videos come out. So until next time, I will catch you later. Peace.